They drove a pink SUV across my corn for laughs. They thought property lines were jokes. So I did the one thing the law couldn't stop. I let the earth do the talking. By morning, her car was swallowed. By noon, the whole neighborhood knew who'd been trampling on other people's lives. I still remember the sound of the first tire cutting my field. A soft, incredulous ripping, the way cloth parts when you think it won't. I was standing on our sagging porch with a coffee cooling in my hands, the kind of coffee that tastes like the farm itself. Strong, black, and honest. That was the day Karen Tillman turned my corn into a shortcut. People think land is just land, lines, taxes, and a place to park. They don't understand what's under it. Dirt is history. It remembers the blood and laughter and stubborn little promises my granddad made to this place. We don't own that land so much as answered to it. That's why it hurt, not because she dented some stalks, but because she laughed while she did it, like she was erasing a life with the flick of her wheel. Karen's car didn't creep across once and apologize. It came like a pink bullet every Tuesday and Thursday, right at for always the same way. A flash of bubblegum paint and a bark of laughter that carried to the kitchen window where Pam stood, coffee mug in hand. Pam, God lover, sees things the way the map sees them. Lines and logic and the rules written on the county S paper. She doesn't like drama. She likes facts. She's doing it on purpose, she said the second week. And she was right. The third week I put up the signs. Bold letters, polite bottom line, private property, no trespassing. I nailed them into posts and sunk the concrete deep, because even signs deserve dignity. For a moment I thought it might help. I hoped, ridiculous as that sounds, that a grown woman would see print and shame would kick in. She looked at the sign, rolled her window down, laughed a sharp sound that split the morning like glass, and drove around it anyway. Neighbors talk about entitlement like it's a new crop that sprouted with stainless steel appliances. But entitlement has roots. It starts small. A glance at a map, a hand on an HOA ballot, a sense that rules are for other people. Karen was the president now. Whispering Pines had a cul-de-sac glow and a sympathy for manicured borders. When she took to driving across my field, she was signaling, "We don't respect your line." I could have called the sheriff. I could have chased the paperwork until my hair turned white. I could have been the loud man in every classic story who throws rocks and breaks things. Instead, I tried being reasonable. Gravel lane. Farm vehicle. Crossing sign. I dug and dragged and made a proper approach. Neat and legal. Because I wanted to give even smugness a chance to heal. She laughed at that. Too, but she had the law in her pocket in a way I didn't. An old easement ran through my boundary like an ugly scar left by the developers. It said the county had to be able to get through. Read on paper, it sounds noble, but in practice it reads as a loophole for arrogance. A locked gate would be illegal. A chained fence would be a fine. She used the rules like armor. She drove like she owned the map. That night, Pam and I sat at the kitchen table and I watched her cross the lines on her laptop like a chess player moving a queen. She clicked and pointed and, as always, saw possibilities I missed. "We can't block it," she said softly, "but we can make it unpleasant. We can make it inconvenient." "Inconvenient," I said, tasting the word. It was small, harmless, almost boring. But that night the rain report came in a string of warnings and meteorological promises. 3, maybe 4 inches by dawn. I have a farmer's trust in weather. Storms tidy up things the way a judge can't. They deal in consequences. The law will get you into court, but rain will get you to your knees. The next evening, gutters sang and the sky went a bruised purple. The rain sounded like fists on tin, and the wind worried the maples into frantic motion. I drove the old John Deere right to the line where her tires like to bite. There are ways to argue with a neighbor, and there are ways to let gravity argue for you. I chose the latter, and I chose to do it honestly. No hidden pits, no spikes, no malicious traps. I did what any steward of the soil would call sensible. I reshaped the ground. I pulled a swale, shallow and practical, an honest ditch for handling water. On paper, it was farm work. In practice, it turned the shortcut into a waiting room for mud. I banked the edges a little higher with the blade, just enough to hurl the water into a wide strip. Then I moved a few big stones and a log at the entrance to the approved gravel lane. A little psychological elbow nudge. If you were in a hurry, you might choose the open path instead of the narrow one. If you were impatient and confident and used to everyone else making room for you, you'd pick the open path and find yourself in trouble. Pam watched from the kitchen with a steaming mug and a trail camera pointed like a hawk. "You sure?" she asked. "I'm sure," I said. I didn't feel proud. I felt aligned. I'd put up signs. I'd offered a lane. I'd bent every reasonable rule to accommodate her. All that was left to the argument was consequence. When Karen's Range Rover slid onto the property at 4 o'clock, it was like watching someone moonwalk into a punchline. She considered the narrowed gravel entrance, scowled, and chose the muddy mouth instead. For a second, the SUV ate the field with confidence. Then another. And then the momentum died like the last note of a song. The wheels spun, throwing mud like paint. The car sank slowly, dignified and ridiculous, settling into that soft, black soup until it looked like a toy swallowed by the earth. She hopped out, ankle-deep in muck. White sneakers already stained with hubris. She screamed like an insult had reached her bones. Neighbor phones lit up. Someone brought binoculars. Whispering Pines did what small towns do best. It gathered, gossiped, and embroidered the story until it looked like a myth. I felt something shift inside me as I watched her flounce and fume. It wasn't triumph as much as clarity. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about narrative correction. For months, she had been rewriting the line between us so that my land read as concession. That day, the field wrote its own sentence. Bubba, of the tow truck with a name painted crooked on the side, arrived, and the neighborhood supplied commentary like a traveling chorus. He looked at the proper lane and then at the corn. He chose the corn because men like him make their living in force, not finesse. He drove his heavy rig in and sank to his knees in my soil like an arrogant tree. Tires chewed trenches, and the roadside turned into a battlefield. "Use the lane," I told him, staying on my property. I didn't move to stop him. I didn't need to. His boots made the apology he wouldn't say. Bubba did his best, pulling and groaning, and eventually the Range Rover came free with a wet, reluctant cough. The car climbed out like something that had been born again, but with mud in its throat. Karen stood on the pavement, stare hard as flint, and she began to shout into her phone like the world needed reminding. She'd been humiliated. She'd been damaged. She was the victim. That afternoon, the countryman drove by and looked at the tire marks with a kind of shame, slow to show its face. He measured and took photos and said things about easements and responsible land management. And then, slowly, people began to do the math. A woman who de-used her office to justify trampling a neighbor's livelihood. A homeowners association that backed a president who thought rules were optional. The rest of it fell into the ordinary machinery of small-town accountability. Meetings were called where men in polos and women with clipboards tried to be reasonable and embarrassed in equal measure. Pam and I sat in the back of the room and listened. Karen didn't lose an arm. She lost face. She lost the blithe certainty that other people's boundaries were puddles in front of her car. I won't pretend it ended clean. It didn't. There were apologies that felt like homework, and insurance claims, and someone writing a nasty letter on Facebook that had a dozen mean replies. But something important happened that day. The balance changed. People who'd been too polite to speak up saw that the land itself can hold a boundary if you let it. People learned that a map isn't an invitation. At night, standing alone by the field, I thought about how close I'd come to becoming a different man. It would have been easy to go meaner. There is a pleasure in theatrics, in setting traps that read like morality plays. There's also the hollow sound that follows that kind of triumph. I'd wanted justice, and the earth had given me a tidy, natural kind. Pam put her hand on my back as we watched the sunset steep the field in gold. "You did good," she said. Her voice was gentle and precise, and I knew it meant the hard things had been done rightly. I have a rule now, I tell folks who ask. Fight smart and fight fair. There is a difference between standing up for what is yours and getting lost in being someone you don't want to be. If I'd used tricks that could have hurt her or others, I wouldn't have slept. This mud was consequence, not cruelty. It was the land keeping its own. The pink Range Rover doesn't cut through our field anymore. The HOA quietly amended their shortcuts and common sense policy, and someone put a polite fence where nothing had been before. Karen still walks the neighborhood, but her posture is different. Smaller, a little more aware of the lines she crosses. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind comes in from the south and the corn whispers like a distant congregation, I stand on the porch with a cup of coffee and listen to it. The ground has a voice. It told its story that rainy night, and the story stuck. People tell me I was petty. Others call it clever stewardship. I call it answering back the only way the soil and I know how, with steady work, a little patience, and letting the weather do the rest. If you ever find yourself under someone else's boot, try the quiet things first. Put up the sign. Build a lane. Let the rules do their slow work. But don't forget, the world has a way of speaking when patience runs out. Sometimes the reply comes from the ground beneath your feet, and it sounds an awful lot like justice.